You're listening to the Overcome Pornography for Good podcast, episode 230, Censorship Isn't Protection and the Truth About Porn Bans. Welcome to the Overcome Pornography for Good podcast, where we take a research-based, trauma-informed, and results-focused approach to quitting porn. This approach has been revolutionary and changed thousands and thousands of lives. I'm your host, Sarah Brewer. Hey, you guys, welcome to today's episode where we're going to talk about legal censorship of pornography. So a little bit of a different spin on how we're looking at things today, but I think you're going to really appreciate this perspective. And the promise of today is that you're going to leave feeling empowered, educated, and equipped to really make a big difference and a real difference without accidentally harming the people that you're trying to protect. Right. So many of you who are listening to this podcast resonate with that idea of accidentally being harmed, maybe when the people were trying to protect you, all of the things you heard about porn growing up, all of the tactics to try to get you to stay safe on the internet that ended up just harming you and scaring you and shaming you and creating this big ball of shame. And even if we dare say, use that word trauma for some of us, right? And so I want to talk about this in regards to censorship. And again, the goal here, and my goal has always been like, how do we get the best results for people? How do we make a real difference and get real results rather than just hoping that we get results? Or rather than, doing what we think is right, but it's not actually result driven. And so this is going to be a key concept for you to be able to help heal people and help the world with, all of the things that you want to protect and help them with. Okay, so what is censorship? Censorship is suppression, restriction of access to information, ideas, expressions. So let me give you a couple examples. Censorship would be if a school removed the Chronicles of Narnia or the Pilgrim's Progress out of their libraries because of the religious themes. That is censorship. Censorship is also schools removing books like The Bluest Eye or Stamped because they discuss racism or slavery in America. Censorship would be if a pastor's sermon on family values gets demonetized or hidden on YouTube. Governments restricting websites that discuss dissenting viewpoints is censorship. Journalists being silenced for showing footage of specific things. Maybe that's Palestinian or Yemenite civilians being affected by the war. Withholding federal funding from schools that use curriculums that you don't agree with is censorship. Okay, so this isn't about what we think is right or what is wrong in terms of content or teachings. Right now, all we're focusing here on is that censorship of any kind can set a really dangerous precedent. And often, sometimes these parts of us that are for censorship, they want to be used as a tool for protection of morality, of faith, of goodness, but it backfires and it typically creates more harm than good. And we're going to go through a lot of examples of this today, but I know that you've experienced something similar. And like I mentioned just a few minutes ago, but you grew up with people who thought that the best thing for you was to scare you out of viewing porn and telling you that it was very harmful. I've heard all the things, right? Like therapists, saying to their client, just be a man and just stop looking. If you were just a man, you would stop. Or what would your future wife think? Or what would your crush think of you? And scaring and shaming you out of porn. Even if it's not that intense, you've heard all the things. You've heard all those fear and shame tactics that have backfired, even if they had the best intentions. So even if their intention was to love you and wasn't to shame or scare you, it did. And so I'm just bringing that up again because it's similar here. It can be even with our best intentions. We really need to look at what are the results of this. And harm happens despite our intentions. You can have the best of intentions and still harm someone. Intentions don't create harm or not harm. And so we really need to look at kind of the results of this here. So our outline today, we're going to talk about why is censorship harmful? How does it backfire? What are we really trying to protect with censorship? And is there a better way? And then we'll go through a number of different examples. Also, I'm like cracking up at myself saying the word censorship. I've said it so many times today already. And you know how it starts to sound funny in your mind? And then I'm like, oh, is it my Utah accent that's making me say this funny? So stick with me here as I continue to say the word censorship probably 100 more times today. But what is it really trying to create? What are we trying to do? Let's talk about specifically. Oh, I didn't even bring up the biggest example when I was going through all the examples of censorship. What is the biggest one that we're going to talk about today? That's the most applicable here to you today is porn. So banning pornography, banning, and let me even clarify that a little bit more, banning legal porn, consensual porn. I have episodes on this, myths about pornography and porn panic and all of this other stuff we deep dove into last year that you can go and re-listen to. I'll bring it up again in a minute and give you the exact episode. But let's specifically talk about censorship in regards to banning legal porn, banning consensual porn between two adults who have decided that they want to make porn together and they want to publish it, right? Why is censorship harmful? Why might it backfire? How does it backfire? The biggest one, and we'll go into this a little bit more in depth in just a second, but it creates a false sense of safety without really healing the root. And you all know this if you've followed me and listened to me, and if you've been in the program, there's a lot more under the surface of a porn habit that stuff like filters isn't going to solve, that banning porn sites isn't going to solve. It's a much deeper, the unwanted porn use and the distress and angst around it. There's so much more underneath it. So it's like a false sense of safety, and it distracts us from really doing things that can actually help at a root level in our communities. If we're so focused on banning this, banning that, we're not getting underneath the surface. What are the programs or what are the things or what can we invest in to actually help the root of this? It reinforces shame culture, right? People don't ask for help. They hide. The shame cycle, it makes everything worse. And remember that when we teach that the desire itself is wrong, we don't teach purity or goodness. We teach shame. Censorship creates a big division, so huge us versus them mentalities where, we punish nuance instead of being able to look. And I used to do this. Oh my gosh, you guys, I have so many stories. It takes some time to grow into being able to think in nuance and not see everything so black and white. But just be aware that anything that loudly demonizes other people or others' opinions, we have to be really, really careful. Think about, again, I'm going to bring it back to you and your experience. Anyone who loudly demonizes people for viewing porn, all porn users are gross, all porn users are dirty, all porn users are, whatever that is. Is that true? No, there's so much nuance here and it's not so black and white. So you have to be really careful of anything that creates a lot of division. And then lastly is it becomes control very easily. And so what starts as protecting kids often leads into trying to control how adults should think and be. And so again, we're getting kind of out of the weeds of this is right and this is wrong, and more of just this freedom principle where you can't say that you believe in freedom and you believe in your right to exist how you want and to say what you want to say and to live freely, and then to turn around and say, well, they shouldn't be allowed to do that because I don't like it or because I think it's wrong. And the next question, and I love this question that typically comes up after this conversation is, but what about hurting people? Yes, people should have their freedoms, but people shouldn't have freedom to hurt other people. What about harm? And yeah, right? Freedom should end where harm begins. And again, we have to kind of come back to, if we're thinking about censorship, is that censorship doesn't equal that protection. And so this beautiful desire to protect, it's honorable, it's valiant, but it's a little bit misguided. And in fact, you can protect from harm without censorship. Okay. So we have laws against child exploitation and non-consensual porn and abuse and trafficking, and we should enforce those laws strongly. But that's different from banning all adult content, books, or speech that someone finds upsetting. So a key principle here, right, is also that not all offense is harm. And so this is where censorship can get a little bit harmful and a little bit sticky, is when you start to label things as harm, as things that you don't like or don't disagree with. We should absolutely protect people from actual harm and get to the root of it, right? Like abuse and exploitation. And again, we talked about this pretty in depth in the episode, More Myths About Porn. There's myths about porn part 1 and myths about porn part 2, where we really went into this idea of, some of the stickier stuff. And we should do what we can and get to the root of how can we heal and help stuff like abuse and exploitation. But banning something because it doesn't sit right with you isn't protection, it's control. So, banning something like adults watching consensual legal porn, or LGBTQ plus individuals, or different religious views, or, just a general feeling disturbed by ideas that you don't agree with. We have to be careful to not turn that into control. And if we start calling everything harmful, then nothing that really is truly harmful gets the attention that it deserves. So we tend to water down real issues like abuse and exploitation by lumping them in with things that are just uncomfortable or controversial. And so again, I'm going to point you to that episode on Porn Panic, where we talk about demonizing porn and how demonizing pornography really distracts us from the real issues, like abusive attitudes and behaviors that are in our societies, in our communities, in our religions, where these real issues, they're not coming from porn, but they're coming from power dynamics and systems that aren't equitable. So again, remember, the issue isn't the porn, it's underneath the surface. And so censorship doesn't get us to the heart of really healing what's wrong in our society. It distracts us, and then it just becomes control. I love this idea that sometimes censorship, it can feel like love when you've been taught that control equals safety. So what is real safety? If we've been taught that control equals safety, but it doesn't, then what is real safety? And this is where I want to get into this idea of censorship versus guidance. So censorship says you're not allowed to engage at all in this. You're not allowed to look at these opinions or these views or these ideas, these books, they're dangerous, versus guidance, which is here's how to engage wisely with this material. Here's what to look out for with this material, right? If we're talking about kids and porn, that guidance is going to be sex education. It's going to be, here's what to look out for. Here's what real sex is. Here's what, porn often portrays, and it's not real sex. And if this feels scary or traumatic to you, I want you to come and talk to me about it, because it can feel pretty jarring to see sex on the screen. And also you have this sexual body, and what do we do with these sexual urges? And what are these feelings inside of you? Do you see how it's like guidance versus just no censorship? So, right, Utah has this specific law right now that bans porn for anyone under 18. And doesn't that sound really lovely? If that was just the case, no 18-year-olds ever viewed porn, wouldn't that just, be really great? It feels like a good intention, right? But is it actually getting us the results that we want? No. Is it helping, or is it distracting? Are we looking at what's underneath the surface, or are we more focused on control? Because with this law come a lot of privacy and data security risks. Pornhub won't even operate in Utah. And so you have to get a VPN, and you should see the data of VPN sales because when Utah made this law, Pornhub came and said, well, we can't operate in Utah anymore because there's too many privacy and data security risks. They wanted for you to go to Pornhub, you had to put in your driver's license information or something. And so Pornhub just said, no, we won't be here. And I think there's a couple other states that that this has happened in. And so it creates privacy and data security risks. It creates censorship issues like we talked about. And like I said, it has these backfiring effects. Blocking mainstream adult sites doesn't stop people from seeking porn. It just pushes them towards riskier alternatives. And that's not just a cop-out. I used to hear stuff like that. Arguments of, well, if you make it illegal, people will just go do it in scarier, riskier ways. And I used to think that was just a cop-out. But it's not. It's true. It really does. It just pushes people towards riskier alternatives, right? Minors might turn to unregulated, shady websites that lack safeguards against exploitative or illegal content like Pornhub does. Not that Pornhub is perfect, I'm sure, but there are safeguards in place there. They have policies against illegal content, whereas underground sites do not. So maybe it's ideal, yes, no one under 18 is viewing porn. We're going to do our best to help with that. We're going to teach them. But even if we block it, That doesn't mean that they're not going to look for it. They're just probably going to look for it at riskier places, riskier alternatives. So that's just something to think about. And again, because here's the thing is the law assumes that banning access will solve concerns about minors viewing porn, but it doesn't even address why kids seek it out in the first place. So I have a real problem with people who are going to go and just ban stuff like this and then cut access to funding or help for programs for kids, for programs for at-risk kids, for educational programs, for the education department. I have a problem with that. It seems very naive and like it's doing more harm than good in this. And I think a lot of you would agree with me here, right? Because comprehensive sex education, parental involvement, and open conversations about sexuality are far more effective at helping minors engage with content responsibly. I mean, wouldn't it be amazing if we all, as you know, now that y'all have listened to so much of this content around emotional regulation and what is the root of the porn use, and we need to feel our emotions and we need to change our beliefs and identity, and we need to learn how to process urges and these mindfulness skills. Like, what if we used our resources towards helping kids learn those skills versus just blocking access, which creates censorship issues for adults, creates control over what adults can see and do and view, and also just pushes kids likely to more dangerous avenues. So it's not either that we censor everything and, you know, the government has control over what you can and can't do, or our kids have unlimited access to harmful content. In fact, there's a third, much more effective and less harmful option, which is parental responsibility, education, and better tools, better digital tools. And so a better question, instead of all of our efforts being on how can we ban this? How can we ban this? How can we ban this? Maybe how can we protect kids while keeping the internet free and private for adults? Maybe this looks like device-based age restrictions. So you can't have certain devices until you're a certain age. Or, you know, your device has to have these controls on it until you turn a certain age. Parental control tools. And of course, the most important is going to be that sex education piece and talking to your kids often about sex and pornography and internet safety. And then, you know, the next question is, but what about kids at home who have deadbeat parents? Or, oh, I hate that term, but, you know, have parents that are not involved at all or don't have parents and will not talk to their kids about this stuff. They have no education at home. How do we protect them? And I love this question because it just brings up real concerns about vulnerable kids. It's beautiful. And the truth is, yeah, that some kids have no support at home. And the other truth is that government censorship isn't going to fix that. Again, the root problem isn't porn. The root problem here is going to include a lack of parental involvement. And so do we solve that? Do we solve a lack of parental involvement by censorship? Or do we solve it by focusing our resources on education and community support for at-risk kids? There are real dangers to these kids that are so much bigger than porn. Unstable homes are at much higher risk for sexual abuse by real people, for online grooming and exploitation, falling into extremism or dangerous communities, addictive substances. So this desire to protect is so good and so beautiful. And again, censorship is a misguided and ineffective way to protect. Better ways might be better child protection programs, school resources, community education. I remember, you know, in COVID, it was a problem. It was such a problem with so many schools being shut down because of the unsafe environments at home. I have an aunt who's a teacher who had a girl say to her, you know, she would just come in early and stay late. And, you know, it was so sad that school is ending. She said, because everyone's nice here. Everyone's nice here. And it doesn't feel good at home, you know, and that's not uncommon. If you're a teacher, you know, that's not an uncommon situation. So what if instead we put some of our resources towards helping our community in these other ways that are going to protect much more than banning porn, right? Much more than censorship, which is a misguided attempt to this beautiful desire to protect. We also want to remember what we learned about prohibition in the 1920s when the U.S. banned alcohol, right? It didn't stop drinking. Instead, it led to more dangerous and unregulated alcohol production. It led to the rise of organized crime. and then an eventual reversal of the ban because it failed. And so censorship works in the same way. It doesn't eliminate the demand for content. It's just going to push it into darker, more dangerous places. I think I've hit that one. I've beat that horse on the head a little bit. I think we get the idea now. So just a couple last thoughts here. As we're playing with censorship and thinking about censorship, one last thought is that if we are relying on censorship for protection, it just puts too much power in the hands of too few people. Because who decides what should be censored? Do you want politicians to decide what could be censored? Do you want religious leaders to decide that? Do you want tech companies to decide that? How are we going to decide? How are we going to decide which politicians, which religious leaders, which tech companies decide what is and isn't censored? In history's worst regimes, Nazi Germany, Stalin's Soviet Union, North Korea, all relied on censorship to control their people. And giving a small group of people the power to control information always leads to abuse. Banning books and banning material and censoring stuff has never been on the right side of history. And so we've got to be careful and watch, first of all, not demonize that part of us that wants the censorship, that feels like it's good. Notice it as a part of you that wants to protect. And we just have got to watch it and make sure that our protection doesn't turn into control. And instead we guide and we give wisdom and nuance and love and empathy instead of control. All right, you guys, thanks for being here. Hope you have a great rest of your day. We'll talk to you later. Bye-bye. I want to invite you to come and listen to my free class, How to Overcome Pornography for Good Without Using Willpower. We talk about how to stop giving into urges without pure willpower or relying on phone filters so that you can actually stop wanting pornography. We talk about how to stop giving up after a few weeks or months. And spoiler alert, the answer isn't have more willpower. And then lastly, we talk about how to make a life without porn easily sustainable and permanent. If you're trying to quit porn, this class is a game changer. So you can go and sign up at sarahbrewer.com/masterclass, and it is totally free.